Hey y'all, it's K-Bird Tweets, and this is Peace, Love, and Baseball. This week on Peace, Love, and Baseball, it is Boston Red Sox week. I think it's very timely because, as you can see, Gabby, I'm going to introduce you in a second, but I forgot to tell you I'm a St. Louis Cardinals fan, but you can probably tell by now. And the St. Louis Cardinals actually this week, so all our Cardinals fans listeners will know that they were celebrating the 2004 team, which, of course, was something to celebrate until we ran into destiny with the Boston Red Sox. So we're going to get deep into all of that today with my guest, Gabby, who is the host of Locked On Red Sox and the Boston Balling podcast. Gabby, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. How's it going?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's going really well. I mean, you mentioned 2004, and that just brings back so many great memories of being a Red Sox fan. And I actually did a series on Locked On Red Sox recently that was like a 10-part series honoring the 20th anniversary of that 2004 Red Sox team. So it's funny you bring that up because it's just such a fun, thing to think back on being a Red Sox fan.
Absolutely. And for baseball fans that are not aware of how meaningful that 2004 season was for the Boston Red Sox, we are going to get you all caught up today. But first, Gabby, tell us how you became a Boston Red Sox fan and then how you started covering the team.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in Connecticut and kind of grew up in a mixed family of fans. My dad is a big Yankees fan. And when I was growing up, my cousins were all big Boston sports fans. And when I was a little, about 4 or 5 years old, we went to my cousin's house. They had a Red Sox game on, and I sat in front of the TV with them, and I was super mesmerized by what I was seeing out there. And then my cousins kind of got me hooked on it at a really young age. And then one of them bought me a Nomar Garciaparra jersey for my birthday. My first Red Sox jersey was him. So ever since then, I've just been in love with the Red Sox. And I always joke with my dad that, he just didn't get to me early enough. And my cousins made it a point to get to me before he did to make me a Boston Red Sox fan. And so ever since then, I've just been on the same side as them. And then my dad and a few other people in our family are Yankees fans. So it's like this big household rivalry, which is always a lot of fun too, just to have grown up in that type of environment with just the family being, mixed in that. But I've always just loved the Red Sox. Nomar was one of my favorite players because I had his jersey, and then just kind of kept following the team for all of these years. And I've always just been super passionate about baseball. It's always been my favorite sport. And then a couple of years ago, Locked On had an opening for their Red Sox show because their previous Red Sox hosts were both leaving. And I had started my own podcast during COVID, and they really liked how I was able to kind of build up my own following on that show and kind of establish my own brand within the Boston sports community. So then they interviewed me and hired me to host their daily Red Sox show. And it's just been a really cool and fun experience for sure, being able to just talk about the Red Sox every day, because this is something that I could just talk about any time of day to whoever wants to listen. But being able to actually have a platform to do that and just talk all things Red Sox has been great. I've been able to get some really cool guests on the show too that are involved with the team. So it's just been a pretty crazy ride and kind of happened really fast. But I've just always enjoyed covering baseball and covering the Red Sox. And I was working at ESPN when I graduated from college, and then got laid off from there during COVID. And that's when I kind of jumped into the podcasting space, and I've kind of just run with it since then. And it's just been such a cool 4 years of just really molding myself into this podcast host that I am now.
Yeah, very cool. Always good to hear about a strong pivot story during the pandemic like that. But we were talking before we started recording that we both are singers as well. And I feel like that this translates like so directly when you think about like, okay, how do I continue sharing my auditory gift? Like it really goes in line. And I can tell by your podcast, like just the dynamics and how you speak. And that is something that I think is easy to take for granted because it comes so naturally to people like us, but it's a huge part of what makes you so great at what you do. So it's awesome that you've been able to tie like two big loves and talents together. And here you are talking about the Red Sox. And I got to tell you, Gabby, we have even more in common because I grew up in a split Cubs and Cardinals household. So we've got
wow.
the two best rivalries in baseball right here.
Crazy. The number of similarities here is so crazy. Having that rivalry within your own household, it's definitely a lot of fun. Like I, a lot of times would get my dad tickets to a Red Sox Yankees game as a birthday present or something, and the two of us would go together. So that was always fun. And we still do that. And he still suffers through listening to Locked On Red Sox, even though he is a Yankees fan, because he's like, I may hate the team, but I love the host. So I will still support you and listen, but I don't like the team. And I'm like, well, Dad, it's okay as long as you're supporting me. That's all that matters, really.
Exactly.
Right?
My mom is going to love hearing this because she's exactly the same. I cover all of baseball and talk about all of baseball, but I obviously am like heavily biased towards the Cardinals. And she, being a Cubs fan, she'll, give me the comments, or whether she's texting me or like actually commenting on the YouTube video or whatever. She's always like, what about my Cubs? You didn't talk about my Cubs today. So she's going to love to hear that she's not alone out there. But Thanks, parents of rivalry teams, for still supporting your kids. We all love the game at the end of the day, and that's what's cool about it. But Gabby, I'm going to give us just some kind of like high-level history of the Boston Red Sox. They are probably the most historic franchise that just comes to mind off the top of your head when you think of Major League Baseball. So we won't get like too into the nitty-gritty, but going to try to cover the big stuff here and get our listeners up to speed if they don't know a lot about the Boston Red Sox. So the franchise was founded in 1901. They were unofficially known as the Boston Americans, and they were one of 8 charter members of the American League. They actually played at the Huntington Avenue grounds from 1901 to 1911 before they moved to Fenway Park in 1912, which is the oldest of all the current Major League ballparks. Fenway is known for a lot of different quirky things, but probably most famously the 37-foot, 2-inch left field wall known as the Green Monster. And the team officially took the name of the Boston Red Sox, or the Bo Sox, the Sox for short, in 1908, which they adapted from the Boston Red Stockings, which was the original name of Boston's first professional baseball team, which is now the Atlanta Braves. So all of that up to speed. We got the Boston Red Sox. They play at historic Fenway Park. Tell us about the Fenway Park experience. Like, what is it like? You see it on TV. We always hear on the broadcast, like how amazing and impactful it is. What are your favorite things about it?
Yeah, it truly is just that. It is definitely everything people talk about, primarily because of the history that comes with Fenway. You just walk around that ballpark and you see just all of these different pictures of all these players that have played there before, like Ted Williams, thinking back to that long ago, and just how good of a baseball player he was, just one of the best players of all time, and just how he played at that exact ballpark, and nothing's changed since then. And it's just really cool because you go and you sit in those seats, and it's the same Fenway Park cramped small seats that have always been existent there. So for somebody who really appreciates baseball history, it truly is a unique experience, unlike any other ballpark, because you go to other ballparks and you're like, wow, this is nice and all that, but it doesn't have the same type of history that Fenway Park has. And when you see old pictures of Fenway and then you go to it now, it's still the same ballpark. And it's just so crazy when you go there and you think about all those different things. And obviously, yes, the Green Monster is just classic. It's the place to be. Like when you go to the ballpark, it's on everybody's bucket list as the place they want to sit. And just getting that experience one time of sitting up there is just something that's inexplainable, that you just really have to experience and actually do to understand the feeling of what that's truly like. But there's so much that Fenway offers, between the food and just all the history involved and everything around it too. They have so many good bars, restaurants, different things around Fenway that you can utilize before and after games. And you don't get that with a lot of other ballparks too. I've been to ballparks where there's not much around it. It's just the
Yeah.
stadium and there isn't really much else there. But you go to Fenway and there's just this huge strip of just all these different things and places that you can check out. And it's really cool because before games, it's all Red Sox fans just in all these places, just grabbing drinks or food or whatever they want to do to just hang out before the game. And even afterwards, there's a bowling alley near there that's super fun and just lots of different things that people can do right around the ballpark. And it's all part of the Fenway Park experience that you don't really get other places. So there's definitely a very unique touch when you go to Fenway in particular, more so than other ballparks. And I, am making it a point to go to all the major league ballparks. Eventually, my fiance and I, when we met, kind of made this our thing because we both are baseball people. And definitely comparing it to other ballparks, there truly is no experience like the Fenway experience. So everybody should go there at least one time, if anything, just to say they were able to be in the same, exact building as somebody like Ted Williams or Carl Yastrzemski and just legendary players that have come through Boston.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned like the surrounding area too, because Fenway Park has set all kinds of records for selling out and attendance. And obviously it's a little bit smaller than like some of the newer stadiums, but I think so much of that has to do with the surrounding area and the fact that it's like a whole experience beyond the ballpark as well. And I have not actually been to a game at Fenway, but I've been around Fenway. I'm going to tell you about that tragic story for me as we get deeper in here. But I have been to Wrigley Field many times. I used to live right by Wrigley Field, and it is the only one that I have been to or that I've even heard about that is remotely similar in the sense that like you can park in a neighborhood for the day and just spend the day within like a mile radius of the stadium. And yeah, I think that environment it's what like baseball really, you want baseball to be about.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And Wrigley is at the top of my list. I want to go there so badly. I've heard amazing things about it. And also it has the history similar to what Fenway has. And it's cool because you can go there, like you said, hours before a game and just occupy your time doing different things right around the ballpark that you don't really get to experience other places. Like at other ballparks I've been to, it's just the ballpark there. So if you want to go, out to dinner or something before a game, you have to kind of go to a different area of that city before you make your way to the ballpark. Whereas here, I've been to 7:00 Red Sox games and gone there midday and just like spent a lot of the afternoon just in that surrounding area so that I can just, have the full Fenway experience and then go into the game. And it's just a great atmosphere to be a part of, and just lots of people who just love supporting the Red Sox and are there just having a good time. And it's really truly an experience you can't get anywhere else in terms of everything that comes with the full package of going to Fenway Park.
Yeah, I love hearing that about it because that is so I recently moved from the Chicago area to now I live right outside of Philadelphia. Went to my first Phillies game at Citizens Bank a couple weeks ago. It was awesome, but like you said, I literally tweeted out and was like, okay, what are the bars around like Citizens Bank? And everyone was like, well, there's like this one place and like everywhere else, like nothing within walking distance. And I was like, okay, well, that reads because, like you said, the Milwaukee Brewers stadium is like that. Like most of the other stadiums are like that, where they're like right off the major highway, but it's very like industrial, or there's just not a lot of other stuff around. And the one thing that I will say that I have a feeling the Phillies and the Red Sox have in common from their in-stadium experience is I noticed what was different to me about the Phillies experience was that everyone, even way up high where I was sitting, was like zoned in on the game. And everybody there, no matter what your age, your race, your gender, like everybody was so into and knew exactly what was going on for every pitch. Would you say that Red Sox fans are generally as dialed in at a game that way?
100%. Yeah. I mean, it feels like a playoff atmosphere so many times at Fenway when you're there. And it's just cool because Boston fans can be very hard on their teams, but they're also incredibly loyal. And
Yeah.
they are those types of diehard fans that you know, picture. There's just something special about the Red Sox fan base that they all come together to support their team. And every time I go there, especially if it's a Red Sox Yankees game or they're playing a division rival or just another really good team, it always feels like a playoff type of atmosphere. And I can agree with you that Citizens Bank Park is similar to that too, because I remember saying that the first time I went there. What I didn't like about that place was just the traffic to get in there and just how long it actually took to get there when you can see the ballpark from the highway and feel like you're so close, but then you're not actually.
Right.
But I did remember thinking after that game how just the atmosphere was super cool because all the fans were super engaged in what was going on. Whereas at some ballparks, people will kind of, you know, come in and out, maybe not stay for the whole game, maybe kind of just be there to socialize with the group that they're with, and they're not as into the game. But Red Sox fans are very locked in at these games, and it's cool to be part of that because, I mean, during the playoffs, it's just an unimaginable experience, really. But it's even during regular season. I mean, it could be a game in the middle of May, you know, and the Red Sox are playing the Rays or somebody like that. And it still kind of feels like it's that type of atmosphere because they just want to see this team win games. So it's super cool no matter what time of year it is when you go. It always has that same energy. And it's also small. Like Fenway's smaller than a lot of other ballparks, so it creates for a more personalized experience because the seats are close together. Everybody's closer to the action on the field. And even the players feel like they're more, you know, in tune with the crowd and what's going on with the fans because it's just a close knit, physically experience. Whereas, like at other ballparks, they're bigger a lot of times. So it definitely helps create that mentality of everybody super locked in, and the players can feed off of that energy because you feel like you're closer to the action on the field.
Yeah, that makes sense. I hadn't thought about like the intimacy of the experience of that older ballpark. But yeah, and I mean, no shade to we love that people like to go to baseball games and socialize and all of that too, but it is cool to see like in this world where there's all this talk of like attention spans are getting shorter and you know the game is in trouble because it, you know, people are just not as interested in what's going on and we got to make it faster and blah blah blah, that there are still so many people who appreciate baseball for what it has been for so long, which is what makes it different than other sports. And I don't know about you, but that's a big reason why I know I love it.
Oh yeah. No, absolutely same here. There's a lot to be said for like being a huge baseball fan and wanting to actually enjoy all the action that goes on during a game and to be able to go to a place where everybody else feels the same is definitely like a special thing because I know I went to Dodger Stadium when I was in college because I did a program in LA through my school, and everybody just wasn't as engaged. Like a lot of people didn't show up till like the third or fourth inning, and some people were leaving early, and it just wasn't the same type of experience that I got at Fenway. And I was just like, wow, it's yeah, like I'm sure they enjoy watching the game, but it's not like these people like live and die off of how this team does. And I feel like you have that live and die mentality with the Red Sox at Fenway.
Yeah, to feel like the whole crowd almost like breathing with every pitch is very cool in itself.
Yeah.
Well, the team found immediate success very early on in the early 1900s, and with a superstar that baseball fans know the name of today as Cy Young. He was the premier pitcher of his generation. His name is actually Denton True Cy Young, more commonly known as Cy, but he spent nearly 20 years in the big leagues. He set the pitching standard for all of baseball to follow, which is why we have the annual Cy Young Award, which is given to the best pitcher in each league these days. But Cy was the only pitcher in baseball's first 100 years to win 500 games. He had 3 no-hit shutouts and a perfect game on May 5th of 1904 throughout his career. The team at this time was also led by Jimmy Collins, who was the third baseman and player manager. And Boston actually won the very first World Series in 1903 by defeating the Pittsburgh Pirates. And they continued their successful run in the 1910s, winning 4 more championships in 1912, 1915, 1916, and 1918, with lineups that included center field Tris Speaker, pitcher Smokey Joe Wood, and a young pitcher turned outfielder named Babe Ruth, who you might have heard of. So Now we got to get into it, Gabby, because Babe Ruth was signed from the Baltimore Orioles of the International League in 1914 to the Red Sox. In 1915, the team won 101 games and went on to the 1915 World Series, where they beat the Phillies 4-1. Following the 1915 season, Tris Speaker was traded to the Cleveland Indians, but the Red Sox still went on to win the 1916 World Series when they defeated the Brooklyn Robins, who I haven't come across in my team features yet, but I'm sure I'll get there eventually. In 1918, Babe Ruth led the team to another World Series championship, this time over the Chicago Cubs. But on December 26th, Christmas is over, in 1919, and the team sells Babe Ruth, who had played the previous 6 seasons for the Red Sox, to the rival New York Yankees. The sale was announced on January 6th of 1920. And I don't know if you knew this, Gabby, but I'm really excited to bring you in on it now, knowing that you're a singer as well, because it is actually believed that the owner of the Red Sox at the time sold Babe Ruth and his contract to the Yankees to finance the Broadway musical No, No, Nanette. This Broadway musical did not actually open until 1925, but there is a book by Lee Montville called The Big Bam, The Life and Times of Babe Ruth, and it reports that No, No, Nanette had originated as a non-stage musical that was a play called My Lady Friends, which opened on Broadway in December of 1919. According to the book, My Lady Friends had been financed by the sale of Babe Ruth to the Yankees. Have you ever heard of this before?
No, which is insane.
Right? I mean, it's like only back in like 1920 would there have been making the kind of money to be, comparable to a professional baseball player's contract. But those were the days. This, of course, like the sale of Babe Ruth, came to be viewed as the beginning of the Yankees-Red Sox rivalry, which we're going to talk a little bit more about, and the supposed curse of the Bambino, which is cited by many Red Sox fans as the reason the team failed to win another World Series in the 20th century, while the Yankees went on to become baseball's most successful franchise throughout that period of time. So, Gabby, we got to get the dirt on the curse of the Bambino from a lifelong Red Sox fan. It is infamous with the Red Sox. Do you believe it? Is it real to you?
Yeah, no, 100% real. And especially when you're living the experience of like wondering if the Red Sox are ever going to win again. And I, definitely don't envy the people who we were living through all of that and didn't get to see the team win again after that. Like, that's definitely a tough go for some of those types of people. But I definitely do believe it. I think it was the Babe Ruth effect, because it's not coincidental to me that he goes to the Yankees and then it just made the Yankees just this machine of a franchise that was just pumping out all these World Series championships, while meanwhile we're just sitting here just wanting to get one in that time. And it definitely was like really hard to be a Red Sox fan and have all these superstitions of like, what do I do? Like, do I have to change certain things about the way I watch games so that they can start winning? And my cousin, had a jersey that he would wear for every game. And it started getting to the point where he was like, should I switch jerseys so that I can, maybe they'll start winning because I'm just wearing the wrong jersey. And it was all these little superstitions of like, are the Red Sox ever going to win again? Or are they just going to become this franchise that just becomes irrelevant over time? And we can never like look back on their history and take it seriously because they just can't win anymore. So there was like a real question that came into play at that time. And I think too, I'm a big believer in like weird superstitious things. And I'm like, you can't change what works. And I think like as soon as the Red Sox changed what worked for them, things just really started to fall apart to the point where they just couldn't get back on track. I mean, they had other chances. I mean, people look back on the 1986 World Series as an opportunity that, the Red Sox had the chance to win it all and blew it that year on such a crazy, weird scenario of a play that you don't always see blow a World Series game. And it's just like little things like that you look back on as a Red Sox fan and you're like, we truly were cursed. Like all these little things that went wrong for this team. And clearly there was something saying like, you shipping Babe Ruth away was the biggest mistake your franchise could have made. And they just wanted to, the baseball gods wanted to make sure to let us know. It was such a weird weird, crazy time to go from all the success they saw early on in the 1900s to just be this franchise that just always had something go wrong when they couldn't afford to have anything go wrong.
Yeah, it's like, who does that? Well, joke's on you, because yes, all of
Yeah.
these we're going to talk more about, like, all of they just, not only did they lose, they like lost and kept finding ways where you thought, okay, we're finally going to win, but no. And yeah, they really were just pulling at the heartstrings. But it seems like maybe like all baseball fans are, a lot of baseball fans, I should say, are superstitious.
Yeah.
But do you think maybe the superstition from in baseball like kind of started with the Red Sox?
I definitely do think so. I think they are the epitome of the franchise that like everybody saw as being the team that can't win anything ever. And then it led to all these fans of other teams being like, okay, well, what if this happens to us? Like, we
Yeah.
need to make sure that, like, we don't do that and we don't make the same type of mistake that the Red Sox made. Like, we can't trade a player of this caliber. Or, like, we can't ship out like guys who, are part of the overall like core of this team that is going on and winning championships. And I think when you think about even now today, like I still have little superstitious things that I do like during games that I'm like, okay, I need to sit in the same spot I was sitting in yesterday because the Red Sox came back in like, the eighth inning and won that game. So I obviously need to sit in this same spot and watch the game from this specific TV that I was at. And there's like little things that I still do. And I hear about that happening with people across the league in general.
Mhm.
And I feel like that kind of started this whole mentality of the way people think about their teams and watch their favorite teams play, because there's nothing like that. Like, there's nothing like what happened to the Red Sox during that time. It's like
Mhm.
one of, if not the most iconic thing to have happened in Major League Baseball
Right.
for like the longest time. And so I think when people think about like, their team struggling to make the playoffs or going these long stretches of not making the playoffs for consecutive years, like that's immediately what people think of as like, I don't want that to happen to my team. Like, I don't want to be the Boston Red Sox who,
Right.
go like 80 something years without winning a World Series. So it's a real thing. And I think people truly like that represents the idea of like being cursed and like weird things happening to your favorite team, because I truly feel like it was a legitimate thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's so deeply embedded in not just Red Sox, but like baseball culture. And you could do like, I'm sure you could do a whole series of episodes on just stories from fans of like things that they like, superstitions that Red Sox fans have specifically,
Oh yeah.
and like things that, stories that they have from that period of time during the curse of the Bambino. But over the course of the next few seasons, many of their top players were traded away. There was the first ever trade deadline was actually implemented here in like the early 1920s. So that changed the game, and ultimately the loss of several top players were sent the Red Sox just into a dark, deep hole. During the 1920s and the early 1930s, the Red Sox were fixtures in the second division, never finishing closer than 20 games out of first. So that tells you, just the stretch of time there after that quick rise to success in the early 1900s. But Boston teams have featured some of the most talented hitters. You have already mentioned a few, including Jimmy Fox, Carl Yastrzemski, Carlton Fisk, Jim Rice, Manny Ramirez, and most famously probably is Ted Williams, who was a left-handed outfielder considered by many to be the best pure hitter ever. And he is actually still to this day the last player to bat above 400 in a season. So if you are a younger baseball fan or a newer baseball fan, that is probably like why you would have heard of him, is he is the last player who has hit above 400. He bat 406 in 1941. Even when they had the great hitters, they also had some really dominant pitchers. They had Luis Tiant, they had Roger Clemens, they had Pedro Martinez. Like, these are names that if you're a baseball fan, But despite all of that, the Red Sox were unable to win a championship between 1918 and 2004. And on top of that being just a brutally long stretch of time, they were always finding new and heartbreaking ways to lose the biggest games. They made it to the World Series 4 more times: 1946, 67, 75, and as you mentioned, in 86. And they lost each of those World Series in the 7th and final game. They also lost 2 American League pennant tiebreakers that were both played at Fenway in front of their home fans, into the Cleveland Indians in 1948 and against the Yankees in 1978. And they had a crushing playoff loss in 2003 to the Yankees. Yeah. We've talked a bit about the Red Sox Yankees rivalry and, just proximity alone. It makes sense. The Babe Ruth trade, all of that makes sense. But the Yankees and Red Sox rivalry has been touted as like the best rivalry in all of sports by a lot of sports writers. What has made it so great over the years? And do you think that that rivalry is still alive and well today?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was the combination of players that were on both teams, just a lot of guys who just really wanted to win and let their emotions show on the field when they weren't winning, and they got very frustrated when things weren't going right for them. And I mean, like back in the early 2000s, like that was like prime rivalry in terms of, Pedro Martinez, Alex Rodriguez, Derek Jeter, David Ortiz, guys who just like were amazing at what they do. And it was just like a power thing of, we need to win, like we need to be better than you, type thing. And I still very much hate the Yankees as much as I did before. Like that'll never change ever. And I think from a fan perspective, the rivalry is still just as strong as it was, but I don't think from a player perspective it's as strong as it was. Like the players are much softer towards each other now, which I don't like. And it seems like the guys on the field get along better than they did at that point. And it was like, the fights would break out like at that time between the players. And it was like, that was something that I wanted to see. And the players legitimately hated the Yankees. And it was like, they were vocal about the fact that they hated the Yankees. And now like players will talk about on both teams, like, it's really cool because of the rivalry, the fans are showing up and all of that, but it's not like the players legitimately can't stand each other like they did back then. And I definitely miss that intensity from it. But from a fan perspective, we definitely still enjoy seeing the Yankees lose as much as we did back then. And I think what makes it so special is just because of how historic that rivalry is and just really how far back it goes. And just the fact that for so long, it was just the Red Sox and Yankees and then everybody else. It was like the Red Sox and Yankees were the teams to beat. And that was it. And it was like, now that that's changed a little bit more, and, you have other teams that are emerging right now to be better than the Red Sox and Yankees right now. I mean, particularly this season with the Orioles and just how good they've been this year. It's like softened the degree of intensity that the players feel when they're playing each other in particular, because like, it was always just the Red Sox and Yankees at the top. And I think if we were to get back to the Red Sox and Yankees being at the top and fighting for the top spot in the division, it would bring back some more of that intensity. But I definitely like still very much feel the exact same level of hatred as I've always felt for the Yankees. And like every time they crash and burn in the playoffs, like they continue to do year after year now, I just love seeing that. And it's awesome, but it's fun to be part of that and be part of, this historic rivalry that has just gone on for years and years and years. And the Red Sox and Yankees just having so much tension between each other over the years. And it's just always more satisfying to beat the Yankees than it is to beat anybody else. And so there's definitely that still, but it's a great, like cool thing to be a part of as a fan, because going to Red Sox Yankees games is still unlike going to any other game. Like there's just so much more intensity involved with that, and the fans just get so much more into it and just really want to win those games. And so I from that standpoint, it definitely is still very much alive. I'm just hoping we can get back to it being the Red Sox and Yankees at the top and then everybody else kind of further back, because then that would help further intensify that again.
Totally. Yeah. So, I mean, not only with baseball just expanding and having more teams that are able to support winning the same way that like the Red Sox and the Yankees were kind of just ahead of the curve on for so long has changed the dynamic of it. So that makes sense. And they just like there are more teams now that have superstar players, whereas I didn't really even think about that it was as much the players specifically. Like the Red Sox and the Yankees had all the biggest and best players, even in like the late 90s and the early 2000s, of where now, how crazy is it that we're seeing Derek Jeter and David Ortiz make peace on MLB Network or whatever, Fox, whatever they work for. It's like, yeah,
it bothers me.
I was going to say, is that, generally something that Red Sox and Yankees fans don't like to see?
Yeah, no, it's weird because it's like you guys hated each other for so long, and now all of a sudden it's like A-Rod and Ortiz are friends.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
No, like that's not how this works. Like right. I hate that. It's so bothersome, and I'm like, that's not helping with the intensity of the rivalry right now. Like,
right.
Like we need to still be divided to keep the rivalry as strong as it was. And I think from a Major League Baseball standpoint, like they still showcase Red Sox Yankees games, a lot, and like in primetime slots and everything like that. So they still are very much, aware that this rivalry is always going to be a big thing. But like that's just, I don't like that. That's too soft for me. Like they need to be enemies because they've always been enemies.
Yeah, and well, it's kind of like the Yankees had their time, and when they were really strong in the 90s, like late 90s, the Red Sox were not. And then obviously the Red Sox, we're going to talk more about how they have really dominated the first 15 years of the 2000s, and the Yankees were not as competitive during that time. So it's kind of just ebbed and flowed, but eventually you got to think, I mean, it's getting closer and closer, and they certainly are neck and neck at this moment in time. So we'll talk more about that as we get up to date here. But as of July 24th of 2004, as of right now, the Boston Red Sox are owned by Fenway Sports Group, which also owns Liverpool of the Premier League in England, a soccer team, and the Pittsburgh Penguins of the National Hockey League. So John Henry, who you may have heard of if you're deep into baseball fandom, is the principal owner of the Red Sox, but he and his partners have invested over $400 million into improvements to Fenway Park, which is, as we mentioned, the oldest operating ballpark in Major League Baseball. But what is the overall fan base's opinion on Henry and the ownership group?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely changed over time.
Yeah, and I think over in 2002?
Yeah. And at the beginning, things were great because they were really invested in winning and spending money to bring over the best possible players to put the Red Sox in a position to succeed. And early on in their tenure, that was happening. I mean, the Red Sox, we talked about, 2004 and all that. And like that all happened. And they had a lot of marquee players on that team. And then for the next few seasons after that, they still continued that same mentality of, we're going to put the best players possible on the field so that this team can succeed. Mm-hmm. But for some reason, over the last few seasons, like something changed. Like there was either, a flip that was switched or something. And like they've had this mentality ever since winning the World Series in 2018 that they would rather rely more on their internal talent in their system instead of investing as much into proven external players. And it's been tough because, I mean, Red Sox fans don't like finishing in last place. Like, that's just something we are not used to. And it's kind of the tone that has been set and the expectation that's been set for the Boston Red Sox is that just doesn't happen, in this time period of the 2000s that we're living in here. And I think it's been really bothersome to people that, they've had a few seasons where they finished in last place in their division and they were struggling. I mean, last season was tough for them, even up to date with that. And, they in 2021 exceeded expectations and went to the ALCS. They just had no business being there. They just went on a run and then they figured things out and they went to the ALCS. But I think in terms of the way that ownership is handling certain business related things with this team now, it's making people really low on them because they're like, we just want them to spend money and get players out here to surround with the current talent. And, it's great to trust the guys you have in your system because there's definitely a lot of young talent that they have coming up, but it needs to also be balanced with getting, veteran experienced players that have succeeded in the league so that you can have that good balance. And they just haven't been doing as much of that, or they've been shying away from really going out and getting those big market players. And like you see, the Yankees in the offseason go out and get Juan Soto, who's like a very exciting player. He sells tickets and he's the type of player that Yankees fans want to go see. But it's like how many of those types of players do the Red Sox really have right now that people are like, oh yeah, like I want to go see this? Like the casual fans are not saying like, oh, I want to go see, like Tyler O'Neill or like,
right.
And like obviously
Rafael
he's
Devers,
a good player, but it's like, yeah, outside of Devers, who's obviously the face of the franchise, they signed him to that big extension, but it's like how many other like really truly big name players do the Red Sox have right now? And I think that's something that's changed over the last few years, because the Red Sox were always a team that had some of those, high marquee players that people knew, and you didn't have to be a diehard fan to know who those players were. Right. And I think now when you look at this Red Sox roster, people who don't watch a lot of baseball probably haven't heard of a lot of these guys. And that's something that has changed, that I think has, caused people to look at ownership differently over the last few years.
Yeah, it kind of seems like, from the outside perspective anyway, it does seem like they were like, okay, first 20 years, this is the plan. And then we're like switching directions to a different approach, instead of just kind of like combining the approaches. They're like, no, we've invested in this for this up till this point, and now we're expecting to be able to take a step back and just rely on our system instead of continuing to do what we had to do at first. That's kind of how I see it, is like, it looks like they just took the gas fully off the pedal and are like, we're going
really weird,
full throttle, but in this completely opposite direction than what you think we're talking about. So it's interesting, but I think now the last few years, it's kind of easy to forget that they are like, as of the 2000s of our current time, like one of the most, probably the most, I mean, in terms of championships for sure, successful franchises. So we got to talk about 2004, because obviously that's when they finally emerged triumphant after 86 years of frustration. They won the World Series in 4 games against the St. Louis Cardinals. So they swept them, and they had actually lost to the Cardinals in multiple World Series throughout this 86 years where they did not win. So it was, I think, even more poetic that it was ultimately that team that they beat and swept out of the World Series, behind the pitching of Curt Schilling and the bloody sock. That's a whole nother story of Red Sox lore that we could do a whole episode on. The batting of Manny Ramirez and David Ortiz, who we've mentioned. But just as important to the Red Sox fans, they also were able to beat the nemesis Yankees in the ALCS, where they came back from a 3-0 series deficit to win 4-3. They were the first team in baseball history to have this comeback in the postseason. They led with standout pitching performances by Josh Beckett, Jonathan Papelbon, who you will see these days on the Foul Territory podcast, so he's still in the baseball world. And they captured another World Series title in 2007, when they swept the Colorado Rockies in 4 games. So not only did they make it to the World Series a couple times there, they swept it and just like blew that curse out of the water. I just mentioned a ton of impactful players, and we obviously talked about Ted Williams and Cy Young, but there are so many baseball greats associated with the Red Sox that we could, again, do entire episodes on. Who is the most impactful Red Sox player in your fandom?
Yeah, definitely David Ortiz. And I think for multiple reasons, he just like represents everything the Red Sox are about when it comes to just having that winning mentality of not giving up and just continuing to just be hungry for championships. And I mean, he still to this day is one of the faces of the Boston Red Sox that'll just forever be associated with the Boston Red Sox. And for me personally, I just watched him go out there in, World Series championship after World Series championship that they won in the 2000s and just completely put the team on his back. That 2013 Red Sox team was not even fantastic during the regular season, not really a team that people expected to go all the way. And then, the tragedy happened in Boston with the marathon and all that. And then he just went full force the rest of that season and just completely put the boys on his back to win that year. 2004, that whole postseason, there were too many big David Ortiz moments to even count, big
Mhm.
home runs that he hit late in games to help the Red Sox win a lot of those games. And to me, like, he really was the biggest reason for the Red Sox having all that success that they did have in the 2000s. And it was exciting to watch because he'd step up to the plate and he was a home run threat legitimately every single time.
Oh, yeah.
And it was so special to see that because it's not a lot of players really that can go out there and just at every opportune time just blast one into the right field stands. So it's kind of cool because he to me was always my favorite Red Sox player. Still to this day, he is my favorite player to play for the Boston Red Sox. And I think just the attitude he had towards playing in Boston and how much he genuinely just loved being there and loved and cared for the fan base and just the city of Boston as a whole and wanting to make everybody proud is something that was so special and unique about him. And even still now he talks about just how great, Boston is and the Red Sox organization. And it's just cool to have seen that. And the Red Sox recently drafted his son. So everything kind of became a full circle
Yeah.
moment there. He just is everything Boston. And it's like, nobody's ever going to look at David Ortiz and not associate him with the Boston Red Sox. I actually was lucky enough to go to his Hall of Fame induction ceremony, which was
Oh my
also
gosh, how cool.
super special too. So there's just a lot of meaning that he has to me. Again, have had a David Ortiz jersey forever, as long as I can remember. And I just like always when I would go to games, like growing up, I just always wanted to see him play. Like I was always just going because I wanted to see him play and just being able to witness like him playing in person so many times. It was just so special. So he definitely, to me, is like the biggest reason why I've just like remained this diehard Red Sox fan for all these years.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because as you were talking about him, I'm thinking in both the 2004 and we're going to talk about the 2013 World Series that you mentioned. They played my team that I was very much emotionally attached to, and I think of the St. Louis Cardinals have so many postseason villains that like I attach to, like Pablo Sandoval from the San Francisco Giants and Chris Taylor in the wild card game against the Dodgers. But I don't think about David Ortiz that way, and I think it's because of what you said about how like he was just so proud of being a part of the organization. He was such a hero for that franchise, and the writing was just on the wall for them to make the runs that they did both of those years, that like I don't have that kind of negativity. I just have like full on appreciation for him. And I had not really thought about that before until I was just listening to you talk about him. But yeah, I like it. He is just an awesome player, and it's very cool to see that he's still in the game today, and that his son, as you mentioned, was just drafted by the Boston Red Sox, which is totally being overshadowed by the LeBron James, his son Bronny James getting drafted by the Lakers. But we are not hearing about as much about how David Ortiz's son was drafted by the Red Sox, which is super cool and could have a lot of excitement around it for years to come. So that'll be a fun thing to keep an eye on within the organization. But I want to get us up to speed here to talk about that 2013 World Series as well. Before that, kind of between their two World Series, they lost a 7-game ALCS to the Tampa Bay Rays in 2008. But they did remain one of baseball's most dominant teams through the end of that decade. In 2011, fans probably felt a little like PTSD because the Red Sox lost a 9-game lead in the wild card standings over the course of the final month of the regular season. This was the worst September collapse in the history of Major League Baseball. 2012 did not really brighten things up. They lost 95 games, which was the most for the team in 48 years. But as you mentioned, they substantially rebuilt the team immediately to rebound in 2013 to post an AL Best 97 wins, where they returned to the World Series. They beat the Cardinals in 6 games, and they captured their 8th World Series title. The team and its success, as you brought up, was very meaningful for the city, having faced the Boston Marathon bombing tragedy in April of 2013. So it was very cool to see the Red Sox be a part of supporting the city through that, and to really see the city reclaim its spirit in that way kind of throughout the season and ultimately end with a World Series championship. So I guess that's a big reason why I'm not too salty about it. But I want to tell you, Gabby, that I was in Boston. I was in Boston in October of 2013. I was there. I took a bus from when I was living in New York City to meet my friends from Central Illinois, and we were going to Game 7. We were going to Game 7, but we did not get there because, of course, there was not a Game 7, and instead I ended up in Boston the day of the Boston World Series parade in 2013. So
That's so funny.
I did get to experience a lot of what you were talking about of all the great bars and vibes around the stadium. But to this day, I have not been to a game actually in the stadium because, yeah, there was no game that day. So
you have to add that to your list of must-sees is go to a game at Fenway Park because it truly is an experience.
Yeah, now that I am on the East Coast, it will be even more accessible for me to get there, and I will be there as soon as possible. I want to ask you now about I like to ask this question because I think it kind of tells the vibes or the culture of a team to players or to fans who might not be super familiar with any Red Sox player in particular, but maybe other players they can kind of attach to the team this way. So who is a player, either current or retired, just any player that you can think of over time that has never played for the Red Sox that like should have been a Red Sox player, somebody who embodies and would have fit into the culture of the team? Is there anybody that you can think of that you're just like, man, that guy, he should have been on the Red Sox?
I think Bryce Harper for sure is somebody who's an interesting one. I think he just embodies that winning mentality of wanting to be part of a winning team. And, you know, he's had so much success with the Phillies and they're looking like they're on a really good track to, you know, potentially maybe win a World Series championship this year. But I've just always liked his approach to the game in his interviews, just always talking about just loving to be part of a culture like Philly because of how like, you know, into the games people get there. And, you know, they were interviewing him during the All-Star break on like the pre-show before the All-Star game. And he was just talking about how like it's just a cool culture to be a part of and how everybody comes to the games and they're so locked in all the time. And I was like, you would love Boston then, like for that reason, because it's so similar to that. And I think just how much success he's had of just being one of the faces of baseball right now. And when you look at, you know, a team like the Phillies, he is the Phillies. Like he is the face of that team right now. And the Red Sox having been used to having lots of players like that who are just among the most popular players in the sport, I think he would work wonders for the Red Sox in terms of people's interest level and following the team too. People would be like, oh, we have Bryce Harper. Like, that's so cool. Like he's, you know, the guy that people would really be able to root for. And guys like that who just are constantly finding ways to come up big in the biggest situations. Like I'll never forget the playoffs a couple years ago when he hit that big home run against Padres. And I was like, yeah, this is the type of player that we need on this Red Sox team. Guys who can like know how to rise up in the big moments and are like, yeah, this is why I'm getting paid as much money as I am to play for this team is for moments like this. So I've always kind of pictured him as being somebody who personality wise could fit in with the Red Sox clubhouse and be somebody who could really help get the Red Sox back to being one of those teams that people are like, oh yeah, like the Red Sox might not have a lot of players that a lot of people would know, but they have Bryce Harper. So naturally it's going to draw more people to wanting to watch Red Sox games. So he's always somebody that I like know wouldn't be a Red Sox player because I don't think the Red Sox would ever pursue him, but that I always would like to see in a Red Sox uniform.
Yeah. Oh, that totally tracks. I could see it for sure. I don't want to give him up because I'm so close now, but I hear that. Well, after the World Series win in 2013, they're hot and then they're not again. The Red Sox quickly fell from glory to lose 91 games and finish last in their division in 2014. And this kind of gets into some of that frustration that you were talking about of kind of maybe they're starting to try to like change that approach. But in 2016, a rebuilt Red Sox team returned to the postseason and won the division title. Both in 2016 and 2017, they lost in the division series, but the 2018 Red Sox broke through, winning a franchise record 108 games during the regular season. They cruised through the postseason. They lost just 3 games across 3 playoff series and ultimately captured another World Series title. They
That team
struggled.
was so ridiculously good. That 2018
Yeah.
team was
What was
crazy good.
it was like do damage was their
Yeah,
motto.
and
Yeah.
they did. They
Oh,
definitely
they
did.
did. Yeah, and then it was like damage done. The
Yeah.
Red Sox
They were
2018.
so good. That team won so many games.
Yeah. Well, they struggled the following season. They won just 84 games the
Yep.
next year, and they finished well outside of playoff contention. And then we've got some drama. We've got some scandal, which is still kind of tied to the Red Sox today. So want to ask you about it. On January 7th of 2020, it was reported in The Athletic that the Red Sox had used their video replay room to steal signs during the 2018 season. And on January 15th, the Red Sox manager, Alex Cora, agreed to part ways after he was named in MLB's report about the Houston Astros sign stealing scandal, which occurred during his tenure as bench coach with the 2017 Astros. He served a suspension. He returned as the team's manager in 2021, and they just gave him an extension. But in 2021, the Red Sox won 92 games. They qualified for the postseason, and they did end up losing to the Houston Astros in the ALCS. But is this like part of the conversation for Red Sox fans still? Is it still something they hold tied to Alex Cora, or how do we feel about Alex Cora these days?
No, I think it's definitely something that people now have kind of moved on a lot more from, just because he kind of accepted the consequences of everything that took place during that Astros scandal. And at the end of the day, like, Red Sox fans know that we are lucky to have him as a manager. He's fantastic at what he does. He truly is a player's coach. I've actually talked to on my podcast a couple of the players currently on this Red Sox team, and they emphasize just how much he really can connect with the players, and they feel like they have a fun relationship with him where they can goof around with him, but also he is a coach, and he knows how to be serious when he has to be, and knows how to help guide these players to success. And the thing about Alex Cora is he knows how to maximize their strengths, so he really is able to put guys into situations where they should be utilized. And I think if you take Alex Cora out of the equation, I don't think the Red Sox are playing as well as they are this season currently. I think he's a big reason for their success this year. They've had lots of injuries this season, and he's been able to keep that team afloat. They were like lingering right around 500 for a while, even with all the injuries, and now they had a fantastic month of June going into July, and then unfortunately a slow start out of the All-Star break. But he has been very good for this team, and I think people are happy that he just signed an extension recently for 3 more seasons as the Red Sox manager. And I think people really have come to appreciate just how good of a manager he actually really is. And, it took people a while when they brought him back, because after he parted ways with the Red Sox, there was a period of time where he wasn't the manager, and then he came back. And I think people at first were a little bit skeptical about that just because of everything that had happened. But I think now when they look back at everything he's really done with this team and how successful he's been as a manager, people are starting to, be a little bit more forgiving of what kind of took place, knowing that he paid the consequences for everything and was very, open to kind of like admitting everything that had happened. And now people are like, we just want you to win us a championship.
Yeah. It's funny because I didn't even realize until I was reading about this that the Red Sox were a part of that at all. Like, I thought it was just strictly for his time with the Astros, which I think is what he was ultimately like punished for.
Yeah.
And the Red Sox just kind of got like pulled into that at the like tail end of it because of their association with Alex Cora. So when I think baseball fans think of the sign stealing and stuff, and even Alex Cora's association with it, it's very much still tied to like his time with the Astros. So that's good to know that it's not tainted the view, and like obviously what he's been able to do with the Red Sox now. Well, before we wrap up into like current day and we talk about, hopes and dreams for the rest of the season here, just some fun stuff that I found out about tying music back into the Boston Red Sox. So the popular 1902 show tune named called Tessie, which is from a old musical called The Silver Slipper. It has been a long time rallying cry by fans, and I guess the tune really saw a resurgence in popularity when the new version by a Boston area band, the Dropkick Murphys, was featured in the 2005 film Fever Pitch, which is a Jimmy Fallon and Drew Barrymore movie about an obsessive Red Sox fan during that 2004 season. Have you seen that movie, Gabby?
Of course I have, so many
love
times.
it. I love it. I'm sorry, Cardinals fans. I'm gonna lose all of you right now, but it's a really good movie. And yeah, this is when I first heard that song as well. The song
it's such a good movie, and it's also like interesting because they had to like refilm the whole ending of it because they like thought the Red Sox were going to lose and they ended up winning. So then like the ending of the movie was already filmed. So then they had to go back and redo it, which I find to be so funny. But like they picked a great, season of Red Sox baseball to make that movie about.
That is how sure they were that the Red Sox were going to lose yet again, that the movie was literally made around that. That's crazy. Yeah. I'm so glad you brought that up. But yeah, this song, Tessie, is frequently played after home wins, and it actually inspired the name of the Red Sox mascot, who is Wally the Green Monster. He has a sister named Tessie. I didn't know about this. Tell us about Wally the Green Monster and his sister Tessie. Are they pretty popular?
Oh yeah, of course. What's cool about them is they're always together, like at Red Sox games. Like you have both of them there, like running around, taking pictures with fans and all that. And when it comes to like on the field, like they'll do little dances in between innings, but they're always together. Like you never see them apart. And I think it's like a cool relationship that like the Red Sox are really enforcing that whole sibling like bond that they have with each other. And I just find it so cool how you never see one without the other. It just isn't a thing. And I just find that to be such like a cool thing for Red Sox fans to be able to see, is just them always together on the field. And there literally are people who will say like they're going to go to a game just because they want to see them together out there. Like they truly like make the Red Sox experience more of like what it is, because it's like really cool because they don't really leave each other's sides ever, which is funny.
Yeah, there are mascots in certain franchises that are just like more impactful or more part of the experience. So that's very cool. That'll be another thing that I have to look forward to when I get there. But
they're really interactive like with people, which is cool.
That's awesome. Another song that I think baseball fans might more widely known that is like associated with the team is Neil Diamond's 1969 single Sweet Caroline. So this song was first introduced to Fenway Park in 1997. By 2002, it has been established as a nightly occurrence there. So it is continuously played at every home game during the eighth inning, like between the top of the eighth and the bottom of the eighth. It's sung along by everybody in attendance. And in 2007, I guess Neil Diamond revealed that the song was written for Caroline Kennedy, who was an American diplomat and daughter of the Boston icon President John F. Kennedy. And Caroline Kennedy's great-grandfather, John F. Fitzgerald, threw Fenway Park's first ever ceremonial opening pitch on April 20th of 1912. I didn't know there was all of this history tied with the Kennedys and Sweet Caroline. I had no idea. But is that something that you think fans really look forward to? It's just like a staple of the Fenway Park experience as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely tough if the Red Sox are getting blown out that day and then they play Sweet Caroline and we're talking about like, good times never feeling so good ever. And it's like, well, we're down 12-2 right now. So times definitely have been better than they are right now in this moment. But that's something that people look forward to going to do when they go to Fenway, is participating in that. Like I had a couple friends that I took to Fenway recently back in May of this year that had never been to Fenway before. And they were saying, I can't wait for Sweet Caroline. And I was like, oh yeah, that's like, sometimes I don't think about the fact that like other like teams don't do something like that. Like that's like so unique to Fenway Park, and like being part of that experience is everybody just singing that song together in between the top and bottom of the eighth inning. And you don't just have like a song like that and during that part of the game for every team at every ballpark. Like that's just not a thing. And so like people legitimately get excited to be part of that because it's so unique to Fenway and you just don't get that other places.
Yeah, so I went to the London series last summer when the Cubs and Cardinals played in London, and they actually, a big part of what they are doing, obviously, with playing the games over there is trying to spread the American culture and the culture around the game, but they played it at the Cubs-Cardinals game at London Stadium, and I was like, this is so fun, I love this, but this is wrong. We cannot, weird. We cannot just take every fun baseball thing. It is not tied. We are not teaching these UK fans what is true to baseball. So I have experienced it because of that, but not for real. And I'm can't wait to do it for real at Fenway Park. Okay, the Red Sox have finished in last place in 2022 and 2023. So you kind of alluded to that as we've talked about the last few years. Not a lot of excitement around the team, but they didn't have a lot of excitement coming into 2024. Maybe Netflix knows something we don't, though, because Netflix is filming the team this season for a documentary series, and they have been better than expected. We talked about how they signed manager Alex Cora to an extension just in the last few days, and they have been active at the trade deadline to stay in the hunt for another Red Sox October. So as we record today on Monday, July 29th, 2024, they are currently 55-49. They are 6.5 games out of first place in the AL East, but they are just 1 game out of a wild card spot. What is your hope and kind of the projection for the Red Sox for the rest of this season?
Yeah, I think they've definitely exceeded a lot of people's expectations in terms of how they performed this year. People didn't really expect them to be where they're at now. A lot of people thought it was going to be a repeat of last season. They won 78 games last year, did not really have a good season. They were just losing lots of games. And for a bit of time, it looked like it was going to be that because they struggled in May and they were, just barely 500, fluctuating 1 to 2 games under and over for a lot of that month span. And it was looking like that was the team, and that is the team that we're going to see this year, just a very average 500 baseball team. Then they started winning lots of games in June, and it started to feel like they were really figuring out who they were and what their identity was, and there were certain players who were really starting to come into their role on this team. I mean, Jarren Duran, who won All-Star Game MVP, has just been a phenomenal leadoff hitter for this Red Sox team. He can really do everything. He just has the speed on the base paths. He plays great defense. He really does it all at the plate. He provides power, also versatility in his offensive game. So there's just a lot of things he does right to help this Red Sox team. And you just have a group of players that just want to win and prove people wrong. And their starting rotation has just been so much better than people thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
Credit to Andrew Bailey, who they brought in this offseason to work with the pitchers. He's just been fantastic in terms of really helping these starters to improve a lot this year. And so, I was happy when they finally came out and said that they were going to buy at the trade deadline, because there was a big question mark surrounding that. Like, what were they going to do and how were they going to handle this trade deadline? And then Craig Breslow finally came out and said, we want to improve the team. And so that's what they've been working on doing. They still do need to make a couple more moves as we speak here. I'm hoping they add some relief pitching at this deadline. And then maybe they'll add another offensive piece, but they might not at this point. They might be done with that. But if they can get a couple relievers and they start to get guys back healthy, which they do have a couple guys coming back in the next couple weeks, which is fantastic, they have a shot. And I think, my expectation now that they've set is to get a playoff spot, because they've shown that they can beat good teams and they can compete against the best teams in baseball, winning a series against the Phillies. They have a winning record against the Yankees. They're showing that they have the capability to beat other teams that are in contention. And so now they've set that, expectation that they can win games. And so I hope they get a playoff spot. I mean, they're really close to one right now. People did not think that they'd be in this spot, but I think if they can get their guys back healthy and they can be up and rolling again, we could see them be a threat. There's lots of speed on this Red Sox team that a lot of other teams don't have. They steal lots of bases and they know how to manufacture runs really well. So I think that's something that they have going for them that not necessarily every team does that's in playoff contention right now. So there's lots of special things going on with this team, lots of young players who are continuing to grow that I'm excited to see more of from in the future. But they definitely have a shot, and they're starting to fill a lot of the pieces and answer a lot of questions that we had about them early on in the season that were concerns, that they're starting to show they can, overcome what people thought were going to be challenges for them early on.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. They don't have the build or like the same characteristics overall from like that 2018 like do damage roster, but you said it perfectly. They're finding their identity and their way to win, and you never know. All you got to do is get in, right? And they could have just as good of a chance as anybody else. Well, Gabby, tell us where we can follow you on social media and keep up with your Red Sox content.
Yeah, so I am on all forms of social media on Twitter at Gabby Hurlbut 10. My show Locked on Red Sox is also on Twitter at LO_Red Sox. I am also on Instagram at Gabby_Hurlbut 10 as well. If you're ever looking to follow some Red Sox content, I'm pretty active on both of those platforms with sharing content either on my story on Instagram or just constantly tweeting about this team like day in and day out because, this is where we've come to in life, just making my life about the Boston Red Sox. So if you don't get bothered by an overload of Red Sox content, feel free to follow me on Twitter as well. I also do sometimes post live streams on my Facebook, which is Gabby Elizabeth. And then also you can subscribe to the show on any podcast platform, whether that's Spotify, Google Play, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. It's also available on any podcast platform where you like to get your shows. Locked on Red Sox is on there, so you can subscribe on there as well. It's Monday through Friday. I'm dropping new Red Sox content. So if you want to keep up with it, with this team that truly has been a lot more fun to watch this year than people expected, and if you want to watch a team that, could surprise people, definitely check it out.
Yeah, and kind of get ahead of the Netflix documentary game, because I think a lot of eyes will be on that team with that coming out in the future. The Netflix is following the team this season, and I know I'm excited to see how that turns out. But we have a lot of overseas listeners that are either just getting to know the game or, trying to attach themselves to a team. And yeah, if you think the Boston Red Sox might be for you, Gabby's content is definitely for you. And what I appreciate so much about your content, along with it just being, keeping everything up to date, is that it's very digestible. You talk about it in a way that's like, it's not just like stats and hard numbers and stuff where you're like, I don't even know what I'm listening to. It's specific to like the culture of the team and kind of what makes baseball, personable, and the kind of interactions that the team has, but also that the fans have, and all that good stuff. So thank you so much for hanging out and sharing your expertise on the team with us today. And who knows, we might just get another Boston Red Sox and St. Louis Cardinals World Series at the end of this season if they can both figure out how to sneak in.
It'd be interesting.
Yeah, you never know. They're always a good time. Hopefully we play more than 4 games the next time that it happens. But thank you, Gabby. Have a wonderful rest of the season, and thanks for hanging out.